So we're at a point where you can have a machine, you can describe a machine, and you can work outward to the business, right? Because people were saying all this crazy stuff. They were like, Bitcoin mining on flared gas is going to save the world. Have you heard that? It's going to save all the gas and then the gas and the landfills. Don't forget about the landfills. It's also going to go to the landfills and it's going to save the whales and the possums and the marmots or whatever. It's also going to go to Texas, and these mega mines are going to save by curtailing. Have you heard that Bitcoin mining is going to save the world by curtailing when energy prices change and demand needs change? Yeah, we're going to save the friggin' world. Bitcoin mining is going to save the volcanoes because you have El Salvador through their volcano energy program that is mining on geothermal, which is this volcano that they have in El Salvador. Bitcoin mining is going to save El Salvador. Bitcoin mining is going to save Bhutan, which has all this stranded energy, and they're actually mining Bitcoin, which is pretty cool because you probably can't find Bhutan on a map, but they have apparently a huge cache uh, of Bitcoin miners, and they are mining Bitcoin and they're holding Bitcoin. So, what I want to focus on tonight is kind of the core thing, which is what the hell is hashing? Have you guys heard of hashing? What is hashing?
Like guesses.
Like numbers trying to match something like that.
It's a matching thing, it's a guessing thing.
Okay.
On 1 to 5, how confident do you feel in understanding what the hell hashing is?
No, one, like a one.
Like a one. And this is crazy because this is like the crux of Bitcoin. Like the whole engine, the whole like all the really cool shit about Bitcoin, in my opinion, comes from this hashing thing. And the reason I should go to my slide actually. Let me do that. What the hell does a Bitcoin miner do? It hashes. And we're so used to seeing stuff from like the high level. We're not kind of focused on the small scale, which is what I'm interested in. Like if everyone's talking about macro, like you get a lot of followers on Twitter being like, Bitcoin's going to be worth $20 million and my stock to flow model is amazing and it's the log power and I trade and the Willy and it's all great, like it's great, but there's too much macro, right? So when you hear things about this space, particularly mining, you typically hear about stuff happening at the high level. You don't hear about stuff happening at the level of hashing. And the hashing is like the crux of what we're doing. Like that's what makes Bitcoin interesting. Has anybody heard about Stratum V2? So Stratum V2 is a really interesting innovation in Bitcoin mining that cleans up a lot of the communications in the way that miners talk to their nodes, right? So to go high level, right? You generally kind of have three things in Bitcoin. You have nodes. Nodes are what runs the Bitcoin code, and they will receive a block and they will check it and they will verify that it's legit. And these nodes are distributed all over the US, all over the world. Some of them are behind Tor, some of them are public. Some of them you can assay, some of them you can't. But this is what we talk about when we're talking about decentralizing Bitcoin in terms of nodes, so that one country can't just spin up a bunch of nodes and screw with the code. Um, as an aside, that used to mean the same thing as a miner in the white paper. It doesn't anymore. You have signing devices, right? Like your Trezor, your cold card, your seed signer. And this is you with your seed phrase where you can generate your wallet, and all of a sudden you have your secret and you can sign and you make a signature and you submit that signature to the mempool. In the mempool is what gets hashed on, whatever the fuck that means. It gets put into a block, whatever that means. It achieves the proof of work or the difficulty, whatever that means. The nodes check it. They go, this is legit. The miner gets their reward. So generally you have these kind of three pieces, right? Stratum V2 cleans up a lot of the communications. It adds some efficiencies. And it has been talked about in this way of like, it's going to save mining. It's going to decentralize mining because there has been this present conversation in the industry about this risk of mining centralization. And when people talk about mining centralization, they're not talking about like we have 20 million machines in the state of Texas and that's decentralized. Yeah, it's decentralized. The way that modern mining really works is that you hash, but you tend to outsource that hash to a pool. And the reason you do that is because in Bitcoin, if miners are just kind of independent agents, the only way a miner gets paid is by finding a block. And with the size of the network nowadays, if I'm running an S9 in my basement, I'm never going to find a block. But I'm going to be paying money because I have to power the thing. There's a cost to me running it. I could be running a ton of machines. I could be independently mining. There are large operators that do run their own pools. So Mara is a good example. Large publicly traded miner. They have tens of exahash, which is an immense number, huge volume of power. They run their own pool. They run their own pool, and when they find a block, they're the ones who get the reward directly sent to them. Like they custody, it is them. It doesn't touch anybody else. Most other operators are going through these large pools. And why would I go through a pool? I would go through a pool because Mara doesn't necessarily know when they're going to hit a block. Statistically, they can guess, okay, well, I'm going to find a block. I'm 3% of the network, so 3% of the day I should hit a block. But sometimes it goes up and sometimes it goes down. And businesses like to know what their cash flow is. And it's really hard to cover that when you get a little bit unlucky because the bills are still going to be coming in for the electricity, but you may want the regularity. And Bitcoin mining is a statistics game in that way. So you go to a pool, and what has happened in the industry is that pools have started to centralize. You've gotten really large pools, Ant Pool and Foundry being the two largest. And so they are the point of centralization where they're not doing the work. They are receiving those transactions that you put into the mempool. They have their mempool, their personal mempool on their node, and they are telling all of the miners that are sending them hash, hey, work on this, work on this, work on this. And so that's the centralization that Stratum V2 has been kind of touted as, hey, we're going to save the universe, this is what we're going to fix. The problem is there's four different configurations of Stratum V2. It's not super complicated. If you're like marginally technical, you can read it. The docs are really beautifully written. But the reality of the situation is that there's four ways to set this thing up. Only two of them actually solve the problem that everyone has been complaining about. There's another example. Have you heard of a mining pool called Ocean? Jack Dorsey doesn't run it. He just was like a supporter and investor in it. Everybody loves to get so excited online. They go, Ocean is going to save the universe. It's going to decentralize mining. It's going to solve this problem that we've had where the foundries and the ant pools are too big. And the risk factor there, if a pool is too large, is not that they can necessarily control the miner. In some sense, they do, but it's that they can control what goes into a block. So if they decide that you're an asshole, they don't want to process your transactions, you're a big publicly traded company, or you're a nation state that happens to have like a public address. If Foundry says, dude, we're boxing you out, it's not happening, it's a censorship risk. So it's not a like you're 100% boxed out, but it is an existent censorship risk. Like if they have say 35% of the network, that now normally the way that you would get your transaction into the mempool is you say, hey, I'm willing to pay this much. Sort of like a train station where the trains leave every 10 minutes, but the ticket prices are variable, right? The train car can only hold so many people. If it's rush hour, some people really want to get to work and they're willing to pay more to get on the train. It's only got so many stops or so many spots to sit in. It's the same thing with a block. The risk that you wind up in pool censorship is that you show up and you go, dude, it's rush hour. Here's $100. Get me on this train. Like I want to go home. It's my baby's birthday. It's a quinceañera. It's like something amazing happening, right? And the conductor looks at you and goes like, nah, we don't like you. And that conductor in that example is the pool. So you have this risk of censorship, financial censorship, where you're not allowed to get into the block. Ocean is going to save the universe. At least they were touted as, right? And they're going to do it with their datum protocol. I won't get into too much of the specifics into it, but the irony, Steve Barber, who is the founder and CEO of Upstream Data, responds to it, very smart guy as an engineer. A miner choosing the block template on behalf of the pool of miners doesn't help decentralization because a regulator still shows up and shuts it down if they don't like the blocks being built, which basically says all this stuff is going to the miner. It used to be the miner did everything, but pools come up and they start to drop risk in the industry. And so you have a pool centralization risk. Ocean comes out and they're going to save the universe and they're going to re-decentralize the mining industry. And Steve Barber comes up and goes, okay, well, this stuff's really great. Like you can do the ASICs, you can have your datum gateway, you can run a node. But if you still need a third party to tell you how much you get paid, that doesn't actually solve the problem because the regulator just targets this guy, shuts him down, and you're just running all your own stuff and you still, what are you doing? Like you're still in the same situation where you can be censored. Same thing from Matt Corallo, who's a dev, he's a developer on Stratum V2, very smart guy. But there's a lot of kind of internal fussing, right? Cryptographers, the programmers, love to split hairs and get into online fights with each other, and they do that very readily and very well. This is my Alex Jones face. I won't get into my last example because all this stuff makes me do this, um, because it's insane. It's insane. We're talking about this super high level stuff that is already a niche within Bitcoin. You understand Bitcoin, but your understanding of like hashing and the protocols that run it and the way that these things talk to each other and the risk factors is even smaller inside of the general Bitcoin domain. So we're making these like big high level BS arguments about things, and nobody knows what the hell they're talking about. So I'd like to do the opposite. We're gonna go small. Has anybody seen one of these before?
ASIC.
Be honest. No. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Very honest.
Yeah.
It's a Bitcoin mining machine, right? Bitcoin mining machine back in the day did not look like this. It looked like your computer. That's what mined Bitcoin. When Satoshi launched in the original versions of Bitcoin that you ran, you were running a full node, you were mining, and you had a wallet. And it was all in the software. It was run on your laptop and your computer. And so you ran your computer and it got hot because your computer was running. It was running the SHA-256 algorithm. Where we are nowadays is actually like almost four steps down the evolutionary line. So we went from CPUs to GPUs. So GPUs you might have on like a gaming rig, like a gaming computer. We went from there to something called an FPGA, which is a field programmable gate array. It basically just means a computer that you can kind of hard program to do things specifically. They weren't very efficient. FPGAs still exist in miners, but not doing the hashing. They now are in often like the control boards, like the brains of the computers. And then from FPGAs, we jump into ASIC computers, which is kind of a malapropism. The ASIC is an application-specific integrated circuit, so that's the actual chip. What we're looking at is a Bitcoin mining machine, but everybody just calls it an ASIC. So I guess like screw the chip designers. Like they spent years engineering these beautiful conventions, and we basically just like built millions of machines and like shat on decades of naming conventions by calling the machine an ASIC, when in reality it's a Bitcoin mining machine that has ASICs inside of it. This machine has four parts. Generally speaking, all Bitcoin miners have four parts. They might have some parts be kind of differently arranged, but generally speaking, they all have to do four things. They might do it in different ways, but they have to do four things. They have to cool themselves. So, example of air cooling. You can also cool yourself in three other ways. So you can air cool. You can, does anybody know? Water block, yeah. And that's where you would run like a water loop, like you would water cool a computer. What are the ways? Dielectric oil is what we use. So non-reactive oil that you dunk the machines into, and they run basically in like an oil that won't explode, but will transfer heat very well. And the newest one is actually really interesting. It's two-phase cooling. So there's a commercial device called a vapor degreaser, which is actually an industrial cleaner. You can think of like a large metal box basically that has solvent inside of it, very expensive solvent. And the way that you normally use it is that if I'm machining like a gear or I'm machining like a part for an engine or something like this, I don't know how many of you are like hitting the trails in like a modified Jeep or something, right? Uh, when you modify metals and stuff like that, or you cut them down, oftentimes you want to clean them really well because they have oils and stuff. You put them into this vapor degreaser. You have a heating element. It heats up your solvent. Your solvent boils off because it has a low boiling point. It pulls off all the dirt and the grime off your part. It condenses. So it goes from a liquid to a gas. It condenses back onto coils. You cool it off, and it's this nice little closed loop. The guys at Mara actually figured out a way where you could take that same box, take out the heating element, put a bunch of Bitcoin miners into it, fill it with solvent, let your Bitcoin miners be the heating element, and then the Bitcoin miners boil off the solvent that then is cooled, cleaned, and recirculated. I was talking to the guys that built it, and they said the machines come out substantially cleaner than when they put them in because it's literally a vapor, it's a cleaning device that they modified to instead of have a heating element, they just pump a ton of electricity into these computers that boil off the solvent, which is pretty sick. So four ways to cool. Second piece that you're seeing here, does anybody know what this is? Power supply unit. How do we get electricity for most of our, how does electricity come to us?
Through power lines.
Through power lines. Power lines are, what's the nature of that power?
Or gas or.
Well, that would be like a generator, the things that generate the electricity. So that electricity is coming in a certain form or a certain format, coming in alternating current. Um, Computers don't run on alternating current. They run on direct current. You have to take this alternating current, and like anything you plug into the wall here is alternating current because that's how we get the electricity to our sockets. You have to get it into direct current to send it to the hash board. So what happens inside of that power supply unit is that you have what are a series of rectifiers and capacitors. So you ever seen like the squiggly lines of an alternating current? You have to turn that into a continuous flat line, and basically that happens inside the power supply unit. So the power supply unit is not the sexiest part of the machine. It is the part of the machine that will die on you first when things start to overheat. So it's kind of like the unsung hero because all the sexiness is in the chips. Everyone talks about like I have a 3 nanometer chip, I have a 2 nanometer chip. Next to that, you see the hash board. What the hash board does is it basically consists of the ASICs. Each of those is an ASIC. The whole thing is a hash board. And what it does is it consumes that direct current power and it mines a single algorithm, which is SHA-256, which is what we call hashing, right? That's where the magic happens, right? Like this is the MTV Cribs tour of like that's not going to hit with any of you guys. Like you guys are when you're watching MTV at night or whoever tells you what used to happen on MTV. There was this show called MTV Cribs where you'd go to celebrities' homes and they would tell you the magic happened, and it was the bedroom. Um, I'm glad. I'm seeing my own impending death as I describe this to you. Um, so thank you. So yeah, the hashboard is where everybody gets excited because that's where all the tech innovation is oriented. But that power supply unit, you can actually lose like 8 to 12% of your efficiency, which is huge in the world of mining. And if it's not engineered well, it overheats. And so downtime, you're making zero money. That's not a good way to run a machine. And the last thing is the control board. The control board is the brain. So the brain of the computer, it's kind of telling everything what to do. Generally speaking, any modern machine that you see will have to have these four components in some kind of way. They're not always going to look like this. In fact, they almost always won't look like this, just with the way machines are being developed. But they will have, in some sense, every single one of these components. Like it's just kind of it's table stakes to get into the game, right? If you're going to build a machine. Once you have all those pieces put together, there's three things that you need to have to actually run the machine. So this is an example. It's not a real machine. This is like an artistic rendering of what would be like a What's Miner style machine. You can see it's an air-cooled machine. It has a bunch of hash boards. These are heat sinks on it. Anybody who's like built a PC has like played around with those. It has a power supply unit. Inside here somewhere is going to be a control board. It's going to be the brain telling everything what to do. And to run it, you need three things, right? So now we've gone from the machine to like the existing machine. I want to actually make it do something, whatever that thing is, because we don't know what hashing is yet. It needs electricity, it needs an internet connection, and then physically it needs to cool itself. It has to cool itself somehow. Like one of those four ways that are kind of commercially available now. Electricity, electric shit gets hot, and the nature of these machines is that if this machine, modern machines can consume like, in excess of like 5 to 7,000 watts, um, that's a lot of energy, a lot of electricity that's going in that has to be evacuated. And because we're dealing with electronics, that's essentially what's going to be evacuated is heat. And that is a ton of heat. Like when you think about a megawatt sized facility, anywhere from uh, three high 200s to like low 200s number of machines that you could put on a megawatt transformer, right? You have to evacuate a megawatt of heat, which is 1 million watts of heat continuously. And like you have to do that while It's summer. It's raining. When the humidity goes up by 20 points, when it drops, you have to do it seasonally. You have to do it when it's 0 degrees outside. That causes its own set of problems. So operationally is where you see a lot of interesting stuff happening. We can kind of play with it, but I don't want to. I want to hit the hashing thing and make sure you get the hashing. And then if you're not totally brain dead after that, then we'll look at sites and facilities and like how stuff is kind of set up. Okay. So you need three things to operate. What does Bitcoin mining do for the network? So I know the parts of the machine. I'm running a machine. I know what it takes to run a machine. What does it do on the network? How would you describe it?
You said this last time, issuance.
Ah, you're a plant. You have disturbed my grand reveal. Um, yes, thank you so much for remembering what I said last time. Yeah, it does two things. This is what Bitcoin mining does on the network, okay? Issuance and settlement, issuance and settlement, issuance and settlement. Uh, to have a transaction settled, to send Bitcoin from one person to another, the only way that happens is through the mempool. And the only way that that happens, or the only place it goes through the mempool, is eventually into a block that a miner hashes, whatever hashing means, because we don't know. Settlement. So it settles your transaction. It makes sure that like once it's sent, like it's gone from you to you. It is not going back. It is in the blockchain, whatever that means. And it is not going to be picked up by somebody else, and you're not going to double spend it, which is literally the whole interesting thing about Bitcoin. The whole interesting thing about Bitcoin is that you send some shit to you, it is digital, and everybody knows it, and it is verifiable. This is the crux of it. Like we are settling the shit. This is very cool. This is a very old computer science problem that was resolved through this beautiful, magical, mystical thing that Satoshi Nakamoto just plopped into our universe, right? Settlement. Second thing, issuance. Where do Bitcoins come from? I feel like I'm having a sex talk with somebody. Where do the Bitcoins come from? Tell me, how is a Bitcoin born? New blocks. New blocks come with the settlement. When somebody finds a block, they get this nice little thing called the Coinbase reward. And in the inception of Bitcoin, when it first came out, we know that a block is supposed to be found approximately every how many minutes? Every 10 minutes. So it's kind of got this heartbeat. So approximately, we can talk about why that's approximate because you have this thing called the difficulty adjustment, which we'll get into, which is related to hashing, but we don't know what that is yet. In the Coinbase reward, you have these 21 million Bitcoin that are going to be created, and you have to give them out. But how do you give them out? You give them out through the Coinbase transaction, and the way that you control the issuance, almost like a currency issuance, is that you set a period, in our case, every 4 years, approximately 210,000 blocks, where you start with a certain issuance. In the first epoch, we talk about epochs. What we're talking about is like an issuance epoch. It was 50 Bitcoin. So you found a block, you got 50 Bitcoin. Amazing. Also, you were doing it on your laptop. Also, you would be sad if you only found like 3 blocks a week. Also, you would then, for the following like 8 to 10 years, have to not sell that Bitcoin or do something stupid to now be sitting on tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. So you issue a lot of it when it's not worth anything. And then every 4 years, it cuts in half. So it goes 50 to 25, 25 to 12.5, 12.5 to 6.25, 6.25 to where we are today, which is 3.125, 3.125, which is just not sexy at all. Like we're getting into the decimal world and like it's just not, it was cool when it was like 25 to, 12.5 and like 12.5 to like 6.25. Like you can kind of hold on, but 3.125 like is not an appealing number. Um, that's not a personal gripe. It's just like once the decimals start to get out there, it's just a lot less sexy. But what are you doing? You're having issuance every 4 years approximately. And so what you're saying, or the bet that you're making when you make this Bitcoin thing, is that at the beginning, it's not going to be worth a lot. So you're going to have to give people more of it, get it into supply, get it moving, get it out to people so they can spend stuff, they can buy stuff, they can transact, have an economy with it, do whatever you do, buy some drugs on online. Um, just get it, like move it, like make it work, right? Eventually, you assume that it will become popular, so there will be demand for it. So you can't give the same amount out. So your issuance drops every 4 years, it goes in half. And now what you're doing is you're giving less and less and less, 50% less. But the assumption is that more people are going to want it. So you have a demand curve that's coming up and a supply curve that's coming down. And that's why people are so bullish about what we're doing because it's kind of this perfect thing. It's a self-reinforcing system where at least when I was starting to get into Bitcoin like 2017, it felt like the thing could die, right? Like there's a lot of learning you have to do to understand what the heck is happening on the network. And that was right when we were going through like the BCH, like Roger Ver, like hard fork, when he was changing the block size. And so like you basically, if you were holding Bitcoin before the hard fork, you basically now had coins on two chains, which is crazy. Um, so you kind of figure out really quickly, like, what the hell am I going to do with this thing? Like anybody, most people I know sold their BCH and bought Bitcoin with it. Like it was basically an airdrop. Um, thank you, Roger Ver. But it like felt existential. Like there was no like it was a joke. Like the Bitcoin ETF, that's a joke, whatever. Like, oh, we're gonna take over the world. Like, shut up. Like, go back in your cave, like you monster drinking weirdo. Like, I mean, the white ones are kind of good. I won't lie. But that was the vibe. Like it felt existential. And nowadays it's kind of like, oh, it's real and it's growing. And what is happening? Issuance is dropping and dropping and dropping. You know, over 90 some odd percent of the Bitcoin that will exist has already been mined. So that's what we do in the network. And this is what's so friggin' cool. So what do we do? This is the abstract of the white paper. Hashing them. What are them? Timestamp transactions, the transactions that you sign and submit to the mempool. By hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that can't be changed without doing the proof of work. This is the whole secret sauce. This is like the magic juju of what makes this shit work. Like people have been trying to make eCash for ages and they couldn't figure it out. And by doing this proof of work thing and doing this hashing thing is where it kind of comes to the fore. So who has now we'll actually get into what the hell hashing is. I've been teasing it for too long. Who's seen something like this? Mempool.space. Personally, I think it's the most beautiful representation of the blockchain out of all of them. It's absolutely amazing. And it just is like so data centric and so data heavy, and it gives you everything, and it's wonderful. And Wiz and Soft Simon are super, super sharp dudes that are extremely competent in doing this kind of stuff, right? It is the best, in my mind, visualization of the blockchain. And what do you see? You see like, here's a block, here's the average fees, here's like the range of fees, the transactions in it, how long ago it was found, who found it. Very informationally interesting. Not a good representation of an actual chain because there's nothing that actually physically shows that these things are linked together. This is a better example, but substantially less sexy. So what goes into a block? This is the blockchain. It is a header, the hash of the previous block, whatever that is, we haven't talked about it yet. The Merkle root, which is essentially a summary of all of the transactions. It's a data light summary of all the transactions that go in. There's thousands of transactions. They're hashed and they produce a Merkle root that then gives you a lot of shit that I have not studied in computer science. But essentially, it is a summary of all the transactions that are going into the block, right? It keeps things data light. Something happens in this block. It is hashed on. Some magic juju happens. I get a line. I don't know what this line is. Something else magical happens. And now I'm connected to the next block where I now have linked this block to my previous block through this thing, this hash thing. I don't know what this hash is, but it seems to be connecting things. Now I want to put more transactions in the next block. Now I'm hashing on it. Something happens. I don't know what the hell hashing is. I get another block, but that block is linked to this block because it has the hash of the previous block, and I can do this through hundreds of thousands of blocks. And that's the cool thing about Bitcoin, about the blockchain, is like people say, oh, it's about blockchain technology. It's not about Bitcoin. No, Bitcoin is the blockchain technology. Like it is hundreds of thousands of blocks that prove that you can cryptographically just link shit back decades, which is unbelievable. The idea that you could do that in a way that is not like compromisable by the NSA. Like Anonymous is not going to drop a video and be like, we stole your coins from 2011. Like it's not happening, dude. And the reason that you know that this stuff is not going to happen or has not happened is because all these like Satoshi coins are the most looked at coins in the universe. Because if those coins move, we got problems. It means that somebody has been able to crack some of our cryptographic protections. It means that there is some unfound issue in the network, and it hasn't happened. And there's a really big bounty, and it's mostly living in a lot of these 50 BTC Coinbase transactions, which are just like ripe little like oranges and apples that are further picking, but you can't get to them because it's protected by this thing called the blockchain that is somehow connected to this thing called hashing. Okay, this is a good representation, but it's actually a layer deeper. This is a block. This is from the Bitcoin wiki. This won't be on the test. What is a block? A block consists of the previous block of the header hash. This is the chain, the thing that connects you to the previous block cryptographically, assayably, in a way that is non-fuckwithable. The Merkle root hash, which are all your transactions, the summary of your transactions, the time, the end bits, and this thing called a nonce. Okay, this is where we're mixing it up. See what I did there? I switched it. You don't know what's going to happen next. You got me on the first one, but you won't. Everything done in hashing is done through SHA-256D. Have you guys heard of this SHA-256 thing? Okay, SHA-256 is a hashing algorithm. What does that mean? I like to imagine it like a wood chipper or like a large industrial grinder, right? It's a large industrial grinder that when I put something into it, I get something out in a uniform size, data. I get something out in a uniform size that looks nothing like the original thing. Looks nothing like the original thing. Okay, well, why is that special? Like I have a blender at home, I have a Cuisinart, like I have a Ninja that I can just grind shit up with. That's amazing. Like I do it every day. Here's why that's interesting. The SHA-256 algorithm is a magic kind of wood chipper where when I put a piece of data into it, I get this thing out. That's what's called a hash that in no way, shape, or form looks like this thing. And when I look at the hash, I can't make a pen from it. I can't go backwards. It's one-way mathematics.
You can tell where it came from.
But I can tell where it came from in the sense that anytime I run this particular pen through my SHA-256 algorithm, I'm always going to get the same hash. So here's an example. How does a website keep your password without keeping a big list of your passwords? Encrypts it. It can keep a hash of it. So you can type whatever you want on your end. It can run it through an algorithm where the end website has no idea what your password is. Has no idea. Because the thing that comes out of the magical hash machine doesn't resemble the thing that went in. It is one-way mathematics. It's a deterministic output. So if I take this and I take this top piece of tape off and I put it back into the machine, I will get an entirely different output. Entirely different output. And if I try to compare these outputs to try to reproduce the thing, there's no relationship. There's no way. It's a one-way mathematics that is deterministic. Anytime I put in this single thing, I will always get the same outcome. Here's another example. I want to send a love note to my wife. So I write her a beautiful email, and I know her brother is a really good online troll. He's good with computers. So what do? I send her this beautiful email for her birthday, telling her how much I love her. And then I run it through the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. I get that unique block, and I send her the message, and I send her the hash. And then what does she do? She gets the message. She has a hash. Assuming that hash hasn't been screwed with, she runs that message through the SHA-256 algorithm. And if that hash comes out the same, then she knows nobody screwed around with the message. It's a real message. If that hash comes out totally differently, it doesn't resemble what went in initially, she knows somebody screwed with the message. Something is different. And this isn't like degrees. It's like if I change a comma, or if I capitalize something, or if I put an extra space, totally different outcome. It's not like it's 20% different. It's 100% different. So SHA-256 is this really powerful tool because it's good for data security. It's deterministic. The thing that goes in the wood chipper always produces the same thing. You put the same thing in the top, you always get the same result. It's easy to check your work. It's super lightweight, computing-wise. And the math only maths one way. Examples. I input something, it goes through a hash function. I get some kind of hash on the back end. None of these hashes look like each other on the back end. I'm putting different stuff in. It doesn't actually matter what I put in. It doesn't have to be talking about foxes. I could be talking about shoelaces and what I'm gonna wear to the game on this weekend, right? Doesn't matter. I'm gonna get totally different hashes in the back end that are deterministically linked to the thing that I put in, 100%, and in no way, shape resemble anything else related to it. That's pretty cool. So what are miners doing? Miners are hashing. Um, what are they hashing on? This data. So they spit out stuff like this. If I say that that hash of the previous block, that's something that looks like this. That's a hash. It's a real hash. What do you notice about it? Here's another real hash.
That's unique.
They're different from each other.
The shit ton of zeros.
A shit ton of zeros. Why do they have a shit ton of zeros?
That's the typical zero. The amount of zeros.
That is a target difficulty. But here's the problem. I just told you that all this data, when I put it into my hashing algorithm and the miner does the hashing, runs the SHA-256 algorithm, that wood chipper machine, I just told you the output is deterministic. So if I have my transactions and I have all this information that should be relatively the same for everybody hashing, how do I wind up with a bunch of zeros? That doesn't make any sense because it's a deterministic output. If I put something in, I get this result, and this result is the result. To get those zeros, I have to add something myself. And this is the proof of work. This is like what the whole thing hinges on. This was the bottom of that slide I previously showed you, this thing called a nonce. A nonce is a portmanteau, combination of words, for number used only once. Number used once. Okay. It is an arbitrary number. That's what's interesting about this. It's not a specific number. A miner isn't like, I did some advanced mathematics and I chose 12 and then I chose 13 and then I chose 48 and that was the best. No, no, no. It is an arbitrary number. I spun the fucking wheel. It stopped on something. That's what I did. I put that number into my block. I hashed it. Okay, so I'm getting a deterministic output, but I'm adding something random to it. Okay. If there's no way for me to guess what comes out of the SHA-256 machine, the output is deterministic, and the only thing I control is the nonce, me, the miner, this random number. What is my optimal strategy to produce a hash that has a shit ton of zeros in front of it?
Change the nonce and just guess and guess and guess.
To guess.
Yeah.
Literally, the optimal strategy is to grind, just to guess and guess and guess as fast and efficiently as humanly possible. If you can guess more times a second than me, and you can do it while using the same or less energy, you are now able to more readily find blocks, achieve the proof of work. All these zeros. So this is really friggin' interesting. All those computers, all they're doing is picking a number, adding it to that big old block of data, this block of data, randomly, running it through the SHA-256 algorithm, getting an output, looking at it, going, does it fulfill this thing called the difficulty? No, throw it away. Yes, I found a block. But it's mostly no, throw it away. And they do this trillions of times per second. If you hear the way that machines are often sold, they're sold on a couple of key metrics, right? Efficiency is a big one. I put in this much electricity, I get this much work out. And that is their joules per terahash, the amount of energy I put in per the amount of work I get out, right? It's sort of like your efficiency of your vehicle. So I have a 2013 Tundra, very low efficiency. If my vehicle made me money, I would sell it and buy a Prius because I'm getting more miles per gallon in the Prius, right? Or I'd buy like a Tesla or some electric car or something like this, right? Same idea in machines where you want to input less energy and get more work. joules per terahash. A terahash is a trillion guesses per second. Currently, machines are in excess of 200 terahash. Bitmain is starting to get up with hydro-cooled machines. They're like trying to crack like a petahash, which is 1,000 terahash. So 1,000 trillion nonce guesses per second. And that's 1,000 trillion nonce guesses per second in a single machine. And if you look on the scale of like megamines, so large riot facilities, they might have a single building that's 100 megawatts in a 900-foot long building that has 26 to 32,000 machines. So I don't know what comes after gajillion. Like it's like where the zeros stop making sense, right? Like you can't compare it to things that are really comprehensible in the same kind of way because we're talking about number spaces, right? So you're doing a lot of guessing. So how does this stuff work together? To fulfill the proof of work, to get all those zeros, which is an output that we can't guess what it is, putting something in, so we just guess as fast as we can. To fulfill the proof of work, which is to find a block, what we're talking about, you must guess a nonce, that's your whole strategy, that outputs a hash into my SHA-256 wood chipper. I get this hash that achieves the current network difficulty. So when we talk about current network difficulty, what we're talking about is the way that the network keeps itself on that 10 minutes, 10 minutes to find a block, right? The way that it does this is that approximately every 2 weeks, it holds the trailing average of how quickly blocks came in. And if they came in faster than every 10 minutes, the network itself does a little automatic adjustment every 2 weeks that goes, nah, make it harder, change the zeros. If they come in slower, take away some zeros, make it easier. That's interesting in and of itself. Why is that interesting? Because you can't control how many people mine Bitcoin because there's nobody that says that you're allowed to mine Bitcoin or not. It's totally permissionless. And if Russia wants to go stand up a gigawatt mine and start mining Bitcoin, or if Saudi Arabia wants to go set up a gigawatt mine, there's nothing to stop them from doing that. But the network will automatically adjust itself because if they're up and running and blocks start to come in a little too spicy, the network's going to go, okay, the trailing average is too quick. Let's make it harder. So it's a self-adjusting system. It's almost like you set your thermostat at 72 year round, and it automatically in the summer or winter will either kick your AC on or kick your cooling on or your heat on, right? Depending on what season it is, right? It's trying to keep you instead of at that like 72, it's trying to keep you at that 10 minutes per block, which is how we're controlling the issuance of Bitcoin and how we're controlling this heartbeat of what we're doing. A lot of people refer to it as the time chain, right? Most of a miner's lifespan is spent doing this. I'm just flipping back and forth. Outputting random hashes. Bless you. Most miners are not getting this. They're getting this, which is why you have to do it trillions and trillions of times. So when you see like an announcement that some solo miner, some guy on like solo CK pool who had like a very small operation hit a block, understand that that is like very near statistical impossibility. Like you should hit a block by the time like maybe your great grandkids are like about to die, is when your mining setup will hit a block, right? Like it is very statistically unlikely for a very small miner or something like this to actually achieve the difficulty because as you progress upwards, it's a system that becomes exponentially more difficult to achieve that proof of work. And this is actually a representation of it's a hex of something that's actually more complex, kind of living underneath it. It's a simple representation, but we are definitely not getting into that because I don't want to be the reason why you guys drink tonight, which you wouldn't do because you have a game tomorrow and you guys are gonna win and you're incredibly responsible and all that other. It's Parents' Weekend. You have to say that stuff. So how hard is it to guess a nonce, right? I don't want you to think about it in terms of the nonce. I want you to think about it in terms of a nonce. if we're playing, you ever see that carnival game where you're trying to throw the little ring and get on the top of the beer thing? This is a way that makes sense to me, right? But you have to imagine everybody around the outside is like somebody who's coming to play the carnival game. Those are the miners. And that space in the middle is the space that we can guess nonces. And it's a mathematical space. It's 2 to the 256th power. Okay, well, that seems big. How big is that? It's, what was it? Something I read today said that it was like in excess of the number of atoms in our universe. Um, so I need you to imagine that this is a number space that is the size of the number of atoms in our universe. And what the protocol is saying by adjusting up and down, by being more difficult or less difficult, when things are very easy and the difficulty is very low, you may have to achieve a proof of work that say in this mathematical space, maybe half of these, you got to get a ring around half of these, right? Because there's not a lot of people mining. They've got old equipment. Like the guesses aren't coming in so quickly. As it starts to get more difficult, the protocol says like, that's too many. It's coming in too fast. We're going to half that. We're going to do an even smaller space. So you have to imagine if this beer game was the size of the universe, and the protocol said, I need you to find 3% of those atoms, 1% of those atoms, 0.0000001 of those atoms. Think of it as a percentage of possible nonces in this big old number space that will spit out for you a hash that will fulfill the difficulty. So we're talking an insanely hard thing to do. And here's where the shit is most interesting to me. And I wrote a book about it. So that's why it's most interesting to me. It doesn't have to be interesting to you, but it should be. Here's what's most interesting is that what Satoshi figured out how to do was create an internally regulated system that connected to the outside world, the world of energy, and the world of, all the places that you can plug in a miner, which he could have never predicted. He could have never predicted that people would be like mining in the Arctic, or people would go to Saudi Arabia and be testing hydro units, or people would be trying to like mine for home heat and build it into their water systems and shit like this. Like he did not and could not have predicted any of this. But he built a system that was so well designed that the incentives were such that no matter how many people come to play the game, the only thing they can do is work harder. That's it. And he figured out how to make computers work harder. Everything that you do now in computing nowadays is like the opposite. If you try to compile code, it's like I need it to be efficient. I need it to like be light and sexy, and I don't want my website to go down, and my images have to be able to compile in these tiny little pixels. Otherwise, the page load is going to go too long, and like the customer is going to lose interest, and nobody's going to look at everything. Everything in computer science is like trending the opposite direction. It has to be efficient. It has to be lightning fast. We have to come up with a new algorithm that means that we can load it this much faster. I mean, there are dudes that build fiber optic wires from Chicago to New York just so that they can get faster ticker prices, so that they can trade on that information. Like everything is trading towards the sexy new technology. And Satoshi said, like, nah, SHA-256 is good because I actually want the machines to work. That's the whole crux. That's what holds all this blockchain shit together is the proof of work. When you get that hash, the hash is not the work. It's not. You already did the work. It's the receipt. Here's the receipt. Maybe I just got lucky. I didn't do the work. I winged it. I studied for 10 minutes on my final. I got an A. I got the proof of work. Possible. Statistically unlikely. But this is the shit that holds it all together. It's the receipt of the work, which is held together. Holy shit, how far back do we go? Through this whole thing that we call a blockchain, that through these magic juju arrows, we all lick out a mempool and just go, yeah, that's it. That's what gets me so friggin' psyched about this whole thing. And what the next step is, which we won't get into, we'll stop and schmooze a little bit, is where I started going into in the book, right? I put an ending there because this is the part where people like to fall asleep. But this was the next thing that got me interested with the book is because you start to go into stuff like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. Where do I run these things? Okay, well, I want to attach it to a grid. How do I engineer the building? How do I run 10,000 of these things in a single building? Okay, I want to build a facility. How the hell do I do that? It's very different to have two machines running versus 20,000 machines running. It's very different to do that in immersion oil versus some kind of like a solvent cooling system versus hydro versus air. Where the hell do I mine Bitcoin? All these cool and very disparate things that popped out in the world of the industry that all harken back to this exact same thing, this hashing thing. Um, and arguably, that's the core way about how Bitcoin mining supports the network, but it actually doesn't say anything about what Bitcoin mining does in the real world. So we spent all that time talking about how Bitcoin mining was going to save the whales in the universe, and I didn't answer the question for you guys. All I did was explain what the hell hashing is and why it's actually the crux of this Bitcoin thing, which is pretty slick. That being said, I would love to stop there. And if you have questions pertaining to the sites or the setups or the applications of stuff, to go into that, or we can go through the stuff we just went through, whatever you're curious in. I got a lot of pictures, and the baby's going to be in bed by the time I get home. So I'm not in a rush. Thanks.
We got till 7.
Right. Yeah, I could go through these facilities and just tell you about them.
So why do you think curb state's bullshit?
Because it doesn't retain decentralization. There's an issue, there's a technical issue in proof of stake, and I haven't studied it for probably like a year and a half. When did they go into the merge or the splurge or the whatever? Whenever that was going on, I was doing a bunch of reading into it, and the basic issue is that they engineered a system that only starts to fail if two-thirds of the stakers are bad actors. And that's very possible because there are only so many places to like stake or custody through. So should you wind up in that situation, you have like a very serious risk of like bad actors on the network through these really large staking entities. And it's also self-reinforcing. Like it literally is the definition of the rich get richer. Because larger holders of Ethereum were able to basically stake huge chunks of it, get interest on it, and through doing that, gain more monetarily than otherwise like a small holder of Bitcoin would be able to. The good thing about Bitcoin is like you can hold a lot of Bitcoin, but that doesn't give you any control over the network. It just makes you rich. Like you're still a loser. No, we're the future. We're very cool. Everybody wants to be
I have a
like
question.
this. Sure, sure.
We'll take those two pictures we showed.
Yeah,
So you said it's a system that like self-regulates to itself, no?
the network, yeah.
Yeah. So I assume that picture on the left has a lot more power to mine Bitcoin than the one on the right.
That's right.
Is it worth building something that big if it's gonna self-regulate to something smaller?
That's what's so cool is that, and that's what's cool to me on the business side of things, right? Because when you think about hashing, we just talked a lot about the protocol and the network and how all that stuff connects. We got a guard dog. Keep us safe. It's probably ghosts in the building. When you think about the network and all the things that are happening in like cryptographer land, none of that actually connects to a business model because Bitcoin is this like self-regulating system. It's this like beautifully hung apparatus. When you start to look at the businesses that are built on Bitcoin mining, a lot of them don't care about Bitcoin. They're solving totally different problems. So a good example is the photo on your right. Those are hash huts from upstream data. Inside of that isn't just a racking to hold machines, it's also an engine. And so what do I do with this? Okay, well, I take it to a well site where I would be producing, petroleum, oil and gas. And oftentimes when I poke my hole into the ground to go get my oil, which is the expensive stuff, it's the stuff I make money from, I wind up with natural gas on top. And natural gas is disgustingly cheap. And as a result of that, oftentimes it's not worth it for people to sell it. However, in the regulatory regime that is the modern oil and gas industry, you can't typically what people have done is they've just vented it into the atmosphere and it's really bad emissions wise, like on the order of like 40 to 80 times worse than CO2 in terms of like short-term warming potential in the atmosphere. It's shorter lived than CO2 when people look at it, but it's like substantially it's multiples in terms of its capacity to hold heat, right? Um, you have that. It's odorless and invisible, but it will kill you if you suck it in, right? And up until recently, you weren't really able to identify it just by driving by a site, but now you can actually because there's satellite monitoring that is able to kind of assess this. And so people are cracking down on it, the venting. They also flare, which is basically you blowtorch it and just let the fire come out, right? And you see it all the time at like refineries and distilleries and stuff, like just the ones off of like going towards the airport, you probably go past them, right? So all over Texas. Yeah, it's like that's your like night lights that you get, right? It's like all the if you're not doing that, it's like all the oil rigs offshore. Um, so they don't, a lot of these guys don't care about Bitcoin. They don't. What they care about is their resources. And so if I have a bunch of natural gas that I just dropped 100 grand to drill this well, but I can't get that gas to market because the price is too low to justify a pipeline or trucking it or doing whatever I might do, Bitcoin mining offers a way to monetize it on site. And so that's a business model now. That has nothing to do with this network. The oil and gas dudes, a lot of them don't care about Bitcoin. All they know is that if my dude on site keeps that engine running and somebody in the sky is going to monitor these machines, I am making money off of my minerals as opposed to them just sitting there doing nothing. The guys on the left, I think it's a core scientific building. What you're typically doing with large buildings like that is that you typically are interested in the Bitcoin, and then you're trying to monetize your business through different, what are often called like curtailments or ancillary services. So the best example is Texas, which is run by a governing agency called ERCOT, Energy Reliability Council of Texas. It is a deregulated state, so there's lots of generation. And you have generation that is all independent operators, right? Guys that own power plants, guys that own windmills, guys that own solar farms, and girls. I won't hate on the ladies generating electricity. Girls that own wind farms and all the stuff. Um, your grid operator is having to balance those loads because the consumer is the most important thing on the grid. Making sure your grandma doesn't die because her AC goes out and her like, the air machine turns off in the middle of the night. That's kind of important, right? That's like what keeps modern society functioning. So the grid operator has this huge responsibility. Typically, what they do is they go to their loads that they can call on. So those are like natural gas, peaker plants, and they go like, dude, I'm gonna need another 20 megawatts. It's getting a little tight here. What they can do now with these large loads, and a lot of these guys, they contract more beneficial electrical rates on this. They go, listen, I've got 500 megawatts in this site. That's pretty big. Um, that's not like 8% of a grid, but it's in aggregate. I think like ERCOT was maybe like 3.5, 4% curtailable Bitcoin mining. That might be an overestimate. It might be like 2.5 to 3.5. Um, but that's still a ton of power. That is a buttload of power for like a system that has like, 80 some odd, 90, almost 90 gigawatts of power. That's a ton of power that's being consumed by Bitcoin miners. Um, they can turn off in times of demand. Another thing that's really interesting about us as Bitcoin miners, especially in these large loads, is that if you ask us, do we want to run? The answer is always yes. The only thing that makes us not want to run is the electricity too expensive. So now if you think about like, okay, I run a solar farm, I run a wind farm, I run a natural gas plant. These are all their own businesses. And when they're producing their nameplate, their max energy, that's when they're making money. That's not always matched with the consumer. And so, especially for a lot of these like thermal loads, like coal plants are big too. Um, if you start to put Bitcoin mining on like coal plants, that actually makes them run more efficiently because you have to get them up. It's almost like your like specific speed that when your car goes at it, that's like its max miles per gallon. If you go faster, it gets worse. If you go slower, it gets worse. These thermal generators have that same point of like maximum efficiency, but they don't get to operate at it because they always have this grid operator in their ear going like, dude, like drop it. Like, It's too much. Like I don't get rid of 20 megawatts. Ah, we need 20 more. All of a sudden you have a consumer that is always there. Then the only thing they care about is can I run all the time, but for the right price. So now we're talking business problems. And that's when it gets really interesting because people don't even care about Bitcoin in a lot of senses. They just care about is my grid working? Am I getting rid of my minerals? What you got?
Do you have anything in your presentation about people using like stranded energy from water, like specifically like hydropower stations or dams to mine Bitcoin? I
Uh,
researched that a little bit this summer and I didn't really see
what'd you get
too
into?
much.
I have a nice picture of a theoretical dam. Isn't that great? And I have a couple of examples
Mhm.
that are actually in the book. So what did you find?
I was kind of just looking at, especially out west, we have so many old dams and infrastructure, and the amount
Yeah,
of stranded energy in those dams
tons.
is insane. And all those
Montana's
like
nuts.
hydro generation like stations that are losing money from said stranded energy. And it seemed like not like there just wasn't really any like Bitcoin in those areas,
It
which was interesting to me
sucks.
because this kind of seems like a cool opportunity.
I can tell you the impetus is there.
Mm.
The impetus is 100% there. The reason it becomes difficult is because a lot of these generators have strong crossover with governmental operators,
I saw that too, like ton of
and that's the
permitting instead
issue.
of little generator within
Like
like
if we
five.
could mine Bitcoin on Hoover Dam, that would be sick. I can tell you where it has taken off is small generators like sub 5 megawatts. And most of the big stuff you see, because basically what he's describing is like there are all these, a lot of them are like WPA projects and like, like building America, like if you build it, they'll come kind of stuff, like stuff we were doing like, mid-century. Um, there's a lot of huge generation, particularly in the US, like the Western US, where you have a lot of rivers, like run of the river production where you have a ton of energy potential, but you might have like 80 megawatts of production, and the closest town is only consuming like 15 to 30 megawatts, maybe. And then the argument is like, well, do we build some high tension power lines to pull it to the next big city? Well, like, guess what? You're still in the middle of friggin' nowhere, Montana, bro. Like Bozeman already has its electricity, dude. So you have essentially stranded production. So in the U.S., it's hard for that reason because it's often like federally managed. Um, so there hasn't been as much movement there as I haven't seen it either, to be frank with you. I've seen people acquiring like sub 5 megawatt sites or like leasing on sub 5 megawatt sites and kind of doing it themselves. In Africa, you get Eric Karsman, who runs a company called Gridless, and I interviewed him for the book. He's essentially monetizing all of these generation sites because all the guys who are financing the generation are like, bro, like we'll just get the money, we'll spend it, and then the town will grow. And then they build the production, and everyone's sitting there like, dude, our houses aren't electrified. Like, what are we gonna do with all this electricity, bro? Like, I make 10 cents a day. Like, what do you want me to do with this? I don't have a phone, like I don't have cabling going to my house, like I don't have any infrastructure. Like, and this is very common in Africa. It's like you had like a jump from a lot of like the rural wiring that you got in the US, you didn't get it in Africa. So you see people that have like a lot of people with smartphones that are doing like their banking and they're like, they're transiting communications via cell phone, but they don't have like light sockets in the house. And like that's a function of demand in some sense and just what was happening there, right? So Eric Hirschman is running some really interesting stuff that solves that problem in Africa. And the biggest one is the Itapu Dam on the border of Paraguay and Brazil, which is 14 gigawatts of production. It was a huge, huge endeavor. It provides like 80 something percent of the electricity that Paraguay uses, but it's only using like less than essentially the agreement because this huge dam, it's one of like the modern marvels of the world. It's actually like the third or fourth largest dam at this point because there's two bigger ones in China that I know of. But because it's between Paraguay and Brazil, they signed an agreement basically where um, they're both entitled to 50% of the energy, like the electricity produced, but Paraguay has stipulations where like Brazil gets right of first refusal to buy their energy at like a discount. So Paraguay's been getting shafted because they have all this energy and it's providing most of the electricity for the whole country. and it's steady, like hydro baseload, very reliable. But they only have one other buyer that they can go to. And then you have the dam that essentially on the Brazil side, it's providing the something like 15 to 20% of the electricity for Sao Paulo, which is a city of like 10, 12 million people, like giant, huge. So you have this huge asymmetry. And so all these Bitcoin miners have come in, and Paraguay's been like, fuck yes. Like, dude, you guys are gonna help us. You guys are gonna help us figure out the transmission situation because I got to get the electricity to you, and then you're gonna help bankroll it, and you want to run all the time on this giant asset that I've been sitting on since like the 90s. Like, are you shitting me? Like, this is amazing for Paraguay. It creates its own risks, of course, and knowing some of the guys that operate in that space, you're still operating in a developing country. So it's like, dude, anything that you could do in the US where you could get a guy to like hot shot out because there's an issue on your high voltage line, like it's not happening in Paraguay. That being said, it doesn't mean that they're like dumb or they're bad operators. It's just developmentally, it's a developing country, right? And like it's really cool because it's been monetized by all these guys coming in and winning my Bitcoin on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. I can just stare at you guys when you're staring at that.
Do you see any issue with like waste around ASICs? I know it's been like a concern that because they're application specific and that they're only gonna get better, so the old ones, what happens with like the older ASICs?
That's a good question. So I mentioned some of the business model stuff that you were bringing up. What's really interesting is that there is a ton of wasted energy through various means, right? Most of it thermal. In generation, you're wasting a ton of energy, efficiency, ton of energy wasted. In transmission, you're losing marginally some energy. When you look at the machines themselves, the ASICs, right? You think, okay, is it like a television where like a bunch of TVs are sitting in landfills and it's just going to become e-waste and sit there? It's not the same. So what has happened or what is happening is that the way that I've kind of thought about it is like ASICs don't die. They just move to a business model that makes more sense for them. When you look at like something like this, so this is the Riot Corsicana site. And so each of these are 100 megawatt buildings. So 400 megawatts. It'll be 1,000 megawatts by the time it's fully built out. Um, if you're doing something like this, you have access to pretty cheap electricity and you're hedging it and spending hundreds of millions of dollars to do that, and you have a full team that is trading electricity for you. Um, you really care about the efficiency of your machines, and you're also able to go to like a Watts miner and say, "Hey, dudes, if we spend $100 million with you, we kind of want to define the terms of what we get. So you get substantially better stuff than you would otherwise get. The other main company is called Bitmain. They suck, but they make beautiful chips. But they know they have the advantage. They don't really give a shit about their customers. They are doing everything that they can in the firmware and the hardware of the machines to make life harder for people that are developing like third-party firmware, like Brains or Luxor or Vanish. Like they spend an immense amount of time trying to do this. When a company shows up and says, I'm going to cut you a 9-figure check and buy a bunch of machines from you, or 8 figures, would it be 8 figures or 9 figures, $100 million? There we go. I got it right. You have more sway in the way that you get to like work with these guys, right? Now, that being said, somebody like this, my oil and gas guy, I might only want to spend 30 grand on my whole setup. And so I know oil and gas guys that on that's 4 generators, 4 gensets that have engines on one side, machines on the other. The engine is more expensive than the ASICs. Like that's what the oil and gas dudes are taking care of. The ASIC, they can buy cheap machines that just run because to them, any number greater than zero, to a certain point, is a monetization of their minerals. So I know dudes that in the oil field still run S9s. And S9s are like 86 joules per terahash. And the most efficient stuff coming out now is like 15 joules per terahash. So you have like a substantial difference in terms of the efficiency of the machine. But in some sense, it doesn't matter because the business operator has a different problem. I'll give you another example. I modified my home heating system and I have an S9 that I changed the fans on to make it run silently. And I put a little inline fan like the kind you'd use if you had like a grow op or something, right? And in the winters, I push hot air into my HVAC system. And in the summers, I flip it around and I push air out through like an extra dryer vent I have, right? So in the winters, I heat. In the summers, I just suck the air out and I push it outside. My personal cost to run that S9 is $0 a month because we have solar panels on our roof. It's $0 a month. So anything I run doesn't cost me anything. If I want the heat and I want the heat, I could replace that S9 with something different. I could throw like an S19 in there. I could spend more on a machine. I could try to get more efficient with it. But I basically use that to generate heat. It costs me zero. It would make me like, I don't know how many cents a day, like, 15 bucks a month, maybe if that much. But I'm not even using it to make money off of. I send the hash like to some guys in Nashville that have a foundation, the SHA-256 Foundation, which is like a mining oriented foundation. And then I send the other half of the ASIC, like, and it's like 5 terahash, right? Like it's nothing big. I send the other 5 terahash to like the space. And so I just like mine to their pool. So it's just like my little donation heater where I get the heat because that's the problem I'm trying to solve for. And it doesn't cost me anything because I've got the solar on my roof and that S9 has already paid itself off like 7 times in a row. And I'm just like frankly surprised it's not dead yet. Um, but that's what I do with it. So like my personal problem is like a utility problem. It's not even a business problem. If I cared about the money, maybe I'd get like a slightly nicer machine, but then I'd have to buy something, you know? Well, again, buy something again.
I guess we kind of go off that. Do you think there's any issue with like the producers of these ASICs and how like the issue that there's kind of only two really main companies that Bitmain and Antminer, right?
Yeah, it's a
And
huge
then do you
issue.
think it's an issue that's pretty centralized, I guess? But
Oh, it's a massive issue.
yeah.
It's yeah, and it's only going to keep being an issue. The
Well,
only yeah, was your
yeah, I
question?
was just saying, why is it mostly in Asia that these are being produced? Why isn't there a big manufacturer? Or I guess like, is there one in Taiwan or somewhere that's more, I guess, west oriented with our Western values?
The holdup is all of the constraint on chip production is through fab space. So you have to get a fabricator to produce your ASIC chip. Like so because everything is hyper focused on the chip, right? To get fab space, you are not just competing with Bitcoin miners. You are competing with Microsoft. You're competing with NVIDIA. You're competing with like the NSA. Like every government on earth that wants to get fab space to like produce a chip. And chip production is like you are basically beating sand into having a brain. Like it is like the most complicated technological supply chain on the face of the earth. It's so unbelievably complicated. Um, a really good YouTube channel called Asianometry is a guy who is like obsessed with fabricators and like TSMC and all the other fun like um, stuff happening in the chip dev world. He has, and it's like high level stuff. It's like he is not like pulling punches, but Asianometry, he gives some really good overviews on like the process of chip making, um, kind of nose to tail, and then he gets into kind of the business of it and the geopolitics of it. It's a huge geopolitical issue. One of the most recent fabricators that have been set up, it was just recently set up in Arizona, and the results seem like very positive. However, it takes like years to set up a fab because you are taking the most complicated machines on the face of the earth that beat sand into having a brain and having to like set them up in a space. So it's a production bottleneck, and Bitmain is a very well capitalized company and have always done super sketchy shit. Always. Um, always done sketchy shit. And there's always been and probably is in some sense some of those issues. Like there were issues around something called ant bleed, which is and ASIC boost. Uh, the issues of like if I run my ASIC, but the manufacturer puts in a backdoor that sends them a quarter terahash or like half a terahash, like at scale, it's my electrical bill, but it's their profit. And then ASIC boost was an efficiency gain that some of the early firmware builders like Jan Kapek at Brains, at the time Slush Pool, right? Slush was the first like largely kind of commercialized pool that was launched on the Bitcoin Talk forums. They found Ampli ASIC Boost, which was essentially like another clocking capability that the machines had that was there the whole time that nobody had access to because they didn't have third-party firmware. So it's like a huge issue. But I think it's being slowly but surely kind of eked away at. And like the more large companies like to work with operators that don't treat them like dirt, like that's just kind of how business resolves. Um, Bitmain does have a head start. They have the most efficient chips, but they don't run as robustly as What's miners. There are some other startup, I know of like a couple of West Coast companies that are developing their own machines. There's a couple of companies that are doing it, the Seal Miner, and then there's another one whose name escapes me out of the West Coast. They're going to have that same issue because they're going to be competing for fab space. In my mind, where a lot of the cool stuff is going to come is from a lot of the like the BitAxe guys, like the open source miner development kit guys, because they're going to have a huge impact on mid-size and large miners because they're open sourcing all the designs, which nobody's doing. Like open source the firmware, the hardware, the cases, like that's going to lead to, in my belief, it's going to lead to like an insane growth in creativity and what people are building and the kinds of like efficiencies and platforms. Like if you think that ASIC chips are going to be heating your water heater, it's not going to come from Bitmain. It's going to come from like the MDK open source like BitAxe guys.
That's optimistic.
Yeah, and like this industry is not that old, dude. Like in the last 5 years, everyone has had to retrofit their machines at least once.
Once?
At least once. Potentially twice. Because you're going from S9s to S19s. And that was largely everybody going S19s. The M30s were kind of chasing it, but they weren't as efficient, but they could run in better, harder environments. Then What's Miner started catching up with the M60 or the M50s, the M60s, which are good machines. The M60 is a great machine. Then Bitmain had the S19 XP, which hit 141 terahash, and that was great. The M60 started coming out around there, like 145, 150, 160. They started pushing it. Then they had the 21 XPs. Then stuff started getting like very comfortably in like the 250 terahash, like 300 terahash per machine. Um, so we're just like iterating, like we're on the train tracks now. Like stuff is getting really efficient and we're eking out these marginal gains. And in the next 5 years, I'm sure people are going to have to replace their shit again because what's happening is a lot of air cooled stuff. Some of the most efficient machines only want to run in immersion oil or only want to run in like these hydro blocks, like blade servers that go into like hydro racks, which makes sense because if it gets more powerful and it's larger, I probably want to control the environment a little better. And if it's like an air cooled machine, like, dude, air cooling is brutal on machines. Like a lot of guys operating in Texas, you're not just getting like the humidity, but you're also getting all the ambient dust.
Yeah.
And it's like insane corrosion. And
So
some
like
people are like,
seaside operations
oh,
would
it's
work.
unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And you're always having to manage it. So like you might have to upgrade all of your stuff from air cooled to like immersion cooled.
Right.
But then you got to buy tanks, you got to buy dry coolers, you have to buy all this other cooling apparatus.
So what do you think is the best environment?
I don't think in terms of best, I think in terms of like because everything is like it's contingent on the business model and that's contingent on the access of the type of energy you have access to. And so in some case you have to just fit your model to whatever uh,
Environment.
your possible environment is. So one good way to look at it is the Köppen climate zones, which is what growers use for
Mhm.
like planting flowers and
Like
stuff.
hydroponic
Like
and stuff?
Well, it's more like the Köppen climate zones. If you search Koppen climate zone, it's literally what gardeners use to decide what to put in their yards
Mm.
because it's a combination, it's a series of zones that combines temperature fluctuations and average humidity, like ambient humidity. And Bitcoin mining machines are really sensitive to seasonal changes and ambient humidity. So I found it's like a good map to get a sense of like it's like your suck meter. How much is it going to suck to operate
Right.
here? And it's all trade-offs. Like guys up in our mine up in Wyoming was super dry, average temperatures in like the 80s during summer. And so it was relatively cool. You could keep them air cool machines cooler, but then you started to get risk in the winter. Because when you start to get like wind chills in the negative teens, negative 20s, what happens on the machine is you get expansion and contraction inside the machine because it's taking in like negative 30-degree air and it's spitting out like 115-degree air. And so across that board, you're getting this insane temperature differential. So you have to start engineering like essentially like back dampers that will kick exhaust air back to the intake to kind of preheat the intake air because otherwise you destroy your machines. Another thing is that it was at like 6,200 feet altitude. So you have to take in like 10%, like your fans are going to run like 10 to 15% harder. So you might want to supplement with like other fans and stuff like that. So it's all trade-offs. If you went to Houston, you would be suffering in the summer, just absolutely suffering, which miners do. Like you can see it, like everyone sucks in the summer when they're operating in those environments.
How the stranded mines? Today?
Depends what they are. If you go to a large immersion mine, almost silent.
Yeah.
If you go to a hydro mine, almost silent. If you go to air cooled, it's unbelievable. Yeah. So like this is modeled off of building A in Rockdale, and you're looking at like that would be still filled with S9s. You'd be looking at like each of there would be 10 of these pods in a building that would go 900 feet. So there's like they're segmented, but they all kind of run next to each other. Each of those is 10 megawatts of power. And so you have 10 megawatts of S9s in those walls that are all, and this is the hot aisle. If you're outside of this room, because it's not like this is just the outside. It's like you have like a whole building that goes over this, right? Um, you're standing there in front of like 10 megawatts of heat evacuating. And it depends on machines. So like S19s don't run as hot as Watts miners, the air cool machines. So if you physically go into a hot aisle for like that's filled with Watts miners on the walls, it will be like 15 degrees hotter than if you're in a hot aisle that has a bunch of S19s. And it will also be louder with the Watts miners because the S19s have like this architecture where it's like 4 fans per machine. The Watts miners only have 2 fans for the machine for the hash boards. So they run faster. There's fewer fans and they're louder and they're like substan. It's like it's an insane amount of heat. It's not comfortable.
Rob, what did you study?
Philosophy and psychology.
Wow. How'd you get into the mining?
Um, I didn't get turned off by the engineers. Sorry if you're an engineer. I don't know.
Yes, but he can't just play the rugby ball.
Well, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, because everybody knew what they were talking about
Yeah.
until they had to actually build it. And then you're looking at it and it's like, well, I understand you have a model, but it doesn't work, dude. And it's just greenfield, man. Like the whole space is greenfield. If you, it's not credentialed. You basically have a lot of people. You have kind of 2 classes of people that in particular are trying to get into mining. You have people who are, it used to just be all degenerates. Like we were all just fucking weirdos. And if you survive long enough, you kind of get in where you fit in because the space is growing so quickly. It's a lot of like small, very smart operators, like guys that are tinkerers that are running like 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt mines, kind of self-building, self-financing, people with like smaller like backyard operations, almost like dad's got his like little sailboat that he works on or something. It's like dudes have their hobby mines, right? You have that kind of like self-financed. And so these weirdos that know so much about the space, but sometimes they don't remember that like they have these blinders on, like they're not trying to solve for a problem of like 10,000 machines. And the problems are very different at 10,000 machines than they are at like 20. And then you have guys that are coming in from the business side who are like unbelievable business operators. A lot of these like Pubco guys are brilliant operators, but they don't understand anything about the Bitcoin side. Like they don't. So like you're kind of trying to build the plane as it's flying.
That's rude.
And like you're talking about multi-billion dollar companies where like I there's a Pubco that I'm going to go give a talk to their staff in the coming weeks about these topics, like what the hell are your machines doing? And these are multi-billion dollar companies where like the staff has no idea what the machines do. Like people just don't know. And this when I was at Riot, it was the exact same thing. Like we were doing like audits, and I was like cruising through with the accounting team and some of the bookkeepers, and they're focused on like, how are my assets, my machines, and my infrastructure being depreciated? They have no idea what it's doing. They have no idea. And it's like that's actually really important. Like it's insanely important that you understand everyone in the business understands what the hell the machine is doing because you wind up with all these weird like people start talking past each other or they start using like weird terminology or they start asking for stuff like your accounting guy or your bookkeeper guy, what he's concerned with is, okay, we bought these machines for how much? We're going to depreciate them on this schedule, and then they're going to be in operation for this long. And they kind of want that precise, like, there's the machine, it lives in a wall, that's it. However, the dude that has to run the machine knows that this machine is like the ship of Theseus. Like a hashboard breaks, you pull a hashboard out, you put it on. A fan breaks, you pull a fan out, you put a new fan on. Like these things become Frankensteins. Like you just keep them running. And so if your bookkeeping team is like, well, we'd like to have all the serial numbers for all the boards during our audit, your operations team is going to look at them and go, stay home. Like don't. Because if I have 10,000 machines and each of those machines has 3 boards or 2 boards in the case of some machines or more boards, and I'm going to have to go dig through the software to export you a 35,000 line Excel document to give you a bunch of information that you don't understand and aren't going to use. And also, there's no accounting standards. Like there aren't like gap practices for miners. There's gap practices, but people are having to figure out how to like apply this all to these industries. So it's not talking past each other is really important in that sense.
That's awesome.
It's fun. You should do it. It's still early. It might not seem like it.